First in Italian and then in English. Buonasera a tutti, buonasera, benvenuti all'ultimo appuntamento dell'anno, prima di Natale, delle vacanze di Natale, con questo ciclo di videoconferenze internazionali. Questa sera abbiamo agli Stati Uniti d'America una presentazione tenuta da Jack May sui tram del Giappone. Prima di dare la parola a Jack, vi ricordo che potete usare la chat in ogni momento e alla fine della presentazione ci sarà uno spazio per tutte le domande che vorrete, o in inglese o in italiano. Good evening and welcome to the last appointment of the year before the Christmas holidays in our international cycle of video conferences. Tonight we have a presentation from the USA on Japan's tramways, or streetcars, as they say, held by Jack May from the ERA Association, Electrical Railroad Association. Before giving the floor to Jack, I remind you that you can use the chat in every moment, and at the end of the presentation there will be a space for any questions, both in English or in Italian. I thank you for following us, and I hope to see you again at the next appointments. You can find a complete list of incoming video conferences on our website, www.atts.to.it. Okay, now I think that it's time to give the floor to Jack. To Jack. So Jack, please, you may start.
Okay, thank you, Roberto. Tonight's program is devoted to the streetcar lines of Japan. More specifically, it mostly consists of scanned slides I took in late March and early April 2010 on a trip with my wife and another couple, where the husband, Phil Craig, was also a traction enthusiast, while his wife shared tourism interests with my better half. We traveled the length and breadth of the nation during cherry blossom season, visiting 3 of the 4 islands that constitute Japan. And it looks like, oh, there we go. This was not my first trip to the land of the rising sun, as Claire and I stopped off there on return flights to the US for short periods in 2005 and 2008 as well. The first in the Tokyo area during April, and the second in the Kyoto, Osaka, Kansai region during a snowy February. I'm grateful to Noah Kaplan, who scanned some of the slides from those 2 trips for this presentation for me, as well as to the internet for providing us with the ability to zoom this presentation and allowing me to show some maps and photos that would otherwise not be available. I must especially thank ERA member Yuri Mahler for permission to use photos from the site transphoto.ru and to Robert Schwandel's urbanrail.net sites for some of the maps I will show. Some of the photos are not from the 2010 trip, but instead were taken in Kyoto, Osaka, Tokyo, and Toyohashi on my visits in 2005 and 2008. This is Mount Fuji, a major iconic vision of Japan. The Electric Railroaders Association ran a trip to Japan in 2014. Phil was in the group, but sadly suffered a debilitating stroke on board a train near Sendai, which eventually led to his death in December 2016. So this show is dedicated to his memory and his lifetime dedication to the cause of electric rail public transportation. Japan is spread out over 4 major islands, from north to south: Hokkaido, and I hope you can see my cursor, Honshu, the main one, Kyushu, and Shikoku. The country's population is very dense and highly concentrated in its cities, as a great deal of its land consists of mountains, which are not highly populated because of the terrain. Japan's population density is almost 10 times the amount of the United States's. Thus, Japan is much more crowded than we are, which probably explains why I found the Japanese people to be so polite to each other and to me in all their interactions. There are two cities with a population of over 10 million. Tokyo at 37.4 million makes it the largest metropolitan area in the world, and Osaka with 19.2 million, the ninth largest. New York, just 19 kilometers from my home here in New Jersey, comes in at about 10th or 11th. This density and lack of land for wide highways and interchanges has led to a great concentration of rail lines, starting with the busy 1,067 millimeter gauge conventional system dating from the 19th century and now almost entirely electrified, followed by a standard gauge 1,435 millimeter high-speed rail system, the Shinkansen. There's a great deal I could talk about with regard to intercity and local rail travel in Japan, especially about the system of private electric railways, which we call interurbans. There are a large number of them, with many connecting major cities in competition with the national rail system. Many of these lines started out as tram lines, but they have been upgraded over time and run with rolling stock that is not in the least bit like trams. So therefore, I've placed them outside the limits of this program. Thus, I will confine myself to the 18 tram systems in the country, actually only 16 of them, as I have not yet visited Sapporo and Hakodate on the northern island of Hokkaido. And because of these constraints, for the most part, I won't be talking about metros and gadget bonds like monorails, of which there are many in Japan, but only traditional tram systems which have been retained in Japan's smaller cities and to a small extent in a few of some of the larger ones. I should also mention that in Japan, the rule of the road is left-handed traffic, and that applies to the railways and tramways as well. Because not all railways can be fitted into specific categories, as their infrastructure and operational characteristics are really a continuum of heavy to light, the number of tramways I quoted could be disputed. But it seems to me that those defined in that manner have one thing in common: onboard fare collection, which in Japan usually consists of passengers depositing the exact fare and coins into fare boxes under the eye of the driver or operator, or showing or tapping multi-ride electronic or magnetic fare cards. This is usually performed when leaving the vehicle, what we call PAYL, pay as you leave. There are change-making machines aboard the cars, allowing passengers to have the exact number of coins or their fare cards ready for a swift exit. Some lines have zone fares, and I'll let those that are interested research how that is handled. I'll just say very cleverly. I also have to say that my observations are now 12 years old, so there could be changes in items like fares and fare collection. Our first stop was Tokyo, where we stayed at the brand new Villa Fontaine Hotel in the Shiodome urban development area near Japan Railway's Shimbashi Station, which were formerly rail yards. Room 832 had a great view of the Shinkansen and the conventional JR narrow gauge railroad, plus also a so-called new transit line, the Yurakamone. Note the duckbill 700 series Shinkansen train and a new transit automated rubber tire train just peeking out in the left foreground. I will say that the existence of these very fast trains made it possible for us to travel between Japan's major cities very quickly and efficiently. The only remaining tram operation of the once vast Tokyo streetcar network is the Arakawa line, which was created in 1974 by combining two outlying routes that mainly operated on private right-of-way. The 12-kilometer long 30-stop route, shown by a double green line, intersects and therefore feeds or is fed by many metro and suburban rail lines. The metros are the thick colored lines on the map, and the suburban lines and other JR lines are the gray ones. The operator is the Tokyo Metropolitan Bureau of Transportation, which calls it the TODEN. Good connections are made with 4 subway lines and 4 suburban rail routes. In 2005, 2 street running sections remained, down to 1 in 2010, and that's right around here. And I suspect that is still the same now, at least it is according to Google Earth. There are no stops on the busy streets. Platforms are high level, so no low floor cars are needed. Pay as you leave is the rule on this 1,372 millimeter gauge line. Phil and I stumbled on an open house at the Tram Museum next door to the line's car house. With a wide open gate, plenty of folks were participating. Museum pieces included number 5501, Tokyo's only PCC. The 1954 built vehicle is equipped with standard foot controls, and the interior contains a great many historic photos. Sumitomo supplied the B3 trucks under a Transit Research Corporation license for PCC patents. Apparently, Toden's management decided that such a fleet would be too expensive, but the single car did run for 13 years. You saw 7504 in the first slide of the museum. The 7500s, some 20 cars built in 1962, were in the process of being retired in favor of newer equipment. They are all now gone. Most service was being provided by the older 1955 built 7000 series then, of which there were 31 that were renovated in 1977. These two are no longer operating. Number 7026 is shown at one of the major transfer locations, OG, in the Kita area of Tokyo, where connections are made to the Kian Tohoku line above and the Nambuko subway line below. This is where the remaining street section begins. The same location with number 8504, one of 5 cars built in 1990. I should mention that the number of cars in each series is relatively small. With excellent maintenance standards, there is little reason to order huge fleet replacements on any of Japan's streetcar systems. Number 8804 near the car house. It was one of 10 of the line's newest units at the time. Number 8903 in a view from Yuri Mahler's site. 8 of these were built between 2015 and 2017. Note the narrow back alley right-of-way, which is characteristic of this line. Because the heritage movement had a late start in Japan, as many companies converted early equipment to scrap to aid in the war effort, many railways have built replicas, albeit not very accurate ones, of early rolling stock. And so the Arakawa line has some replicas to bring back memories of early streetcar days in Tokyo. 2 of these obvious imitations were built in 2007 and are equipped with modern controls and electrical equipment. Here is number 9002 at OG with suburban electric MU train running above. Here is a photo of newer car 7706 that I copied from the internet. It is among 8 such units built between 2016 and 2018. All in all, the Arakawa is a very modern operation with no large articulated cars, but short headways and thus short waits for boarding passengers. Now on to the Setagaya line, Tokyo's other streetcar operation. It does not go into the heart of the city either. In fact, it's more of a suburban streetcar line, like SEPTA's Red Arrow outside of Philadelphia or the Alvik Nokkeby line in Stockholm. It's also 1,372 millimeter gauge. Built in 1925 and owned by the Tokyu Car Company, which has quite a few interurban lines in its portfolios, the 5-kilometer line has 10 articulated Tokyu-built cars that operate through 10 stops entirely on private right-of-way. These 1999 built cars are all painted in different attractive colors. We made a few interesting circle trips in the Kanto region, but only one included a tram line, although it's probably should not be categorized as such. The one I'm referring to was a trip to Enoshima and Kamakura, some 35 miles from Tokyo, where we saw the Great Buddha and rode over a complex routing that covered a couple of gadget bonds, interurban lines, and the JR. But I will only illustrate the final destination because of time constraints. This map shows the Enoshima Electric Railways in red and the Shonan monorail in purple. JR lines are shown in black and the Otaku interurban is shown in green. Here is the Otaku and the JR lines connect over here and run across this way. Like JR's traditional rail lines, the Enoden, which is what the Enoshima Electric Railway is called, has a 1,067 millimeter gauge. It is 6 miles long with 15 stops and is mainly single track with passing rails at many of its stations, which give the appearance of a double track line. While it has some street running on one hand, it also has a closed fare collection system with turnstiles at stations on the other. So perhaps it can be considered a cross between a tramway and an interurban. Both cars 1501 and 1001 were built by the Tokyu Car Company in 1979 and 1980. These two photos were taken near the Hasa station, the location of the Great Buddha. Replica car number 50 was built in 1997 to reflect the 1902 origin of the line. Here is the 13.5 meter high Great Buddha of Kamakura, a major traffic generator for the line. On the Shojensi temple grounds, the Buddha was first built of wood in 1252, but was damaged by storms and later reconstructed, as you can see it here in bronze. We didn't have time to ride the Shonan monorail on this trip, but I rode it in 2005. Built in 1970 to 1971, it has 8 stations. These are photos from the internet, as I haven't scanned my slides from 17 years ago. As you can see, it's suspended, or basically a hanging system, having been built under rights from Cefege, a French Renault Michelin undertaking. These cars were constructed in 2004. We returned to Tokyo in the front rail fan seats of an Odakyu interurban train from Fujisawa. The engineer's cab on the upper level is reached by stairs. Now to the provinces and Toyama, a city of 420,000, lying some 250 miles northeast of the capital, which nowadays is a 2.5-hour ride on a high-speed train. In 2010, the city hosted 2 separate tram systems, each operating on the opposite sides of the JR tracks. But 2 years ago, they were combined with the extension of streetcar tracks under the station's elevated tracks. And here, the link is right here where my cursor is. There's a single track loop section running through downtown, and that's shown here. And that's only run in the counterclockwise direction around this way. And that's the Jinzu River. And note the end of Route 2 at Daigaku-mai. It will be mentioned again later. There's also an interurban line serving the endpoints of Route 1 and the railroad station. All the lines are owned and operated by the Toyama Shiho Railway, which is known locally as the Shitetsu. Base service in 2010 on the 3-line 1,067 millimeter gauge city system was provided mainly by 7,000 series traditional cars dating from 1965, originally 23 in number, but now reduced to about 12 because of the addition of new equipment in the last 11 years. This is the Shitetsu older color scheme. We had horrendous weather on the day we came up from Tokyo, where we had left the ladies to later meet up with us at a hotel in Osaka. Note the umbrella. Also note that the lines paved right of the way, typical of the system trying to keep motorists off the tracks. At the railroad station, we transitioned to the 8,000 series, built in the 1980s. This photo was taken the following morning before our journey to Takaoka and Fukui, and then on to Osaka. The weather had miraculously become sunny and warm after the rain and snow of the previous day. This change in our luck delayed our departure for about an hour for obvious reasons. Another view the following morning. This is the outer terminal of the main line at Minami, where connections are made to the Shitetsu's interurban line. 3 articulated cars, low floor cars in the 9,000 series were purchased by the undertaking from Nagata, manufactured under license from Bombardier. And they were built in the year 2009, and you can see one at left. Spring was certainly not here yet. It was freezing cold at the beginning of April. Note the Tram lettering. Perhaps 2009 was the first time that name was used for this system. Azumi Castle is featured in this view along the single track counterclockwise loop. You will see more castles later in the program, as almost every city seems to have such an iconic historical structure. The other system in Toyama, Port Tram, was originally, a Japanese National Railway branch line, first electrified with 600-volt DC overhead, and then upgraded to 1,500 volts. With patronage low, probably because of poor service, it was designed to convert the line to light rail and back to 600 volts to see if it would do better, much like what was done in Boston with the Highland branch of the Boston and Albany when it became today's MBTA-D Riverside line, and with the same result, success. The terminal was moved to outside the rear of the railroad station with new trackage built through the streets connecting to the suburban line. Placed in service in 2006 with greater frequencies than before, patronage immediately surged. According to Wikipedia, ridership started out with almost 10 times the number of passengers that the railroad's branch line carried. This was the temporary terminal of the line until it was finally linked up to Tram in 2020. The rear of one of the 7 low-floor cars built for the line in 2006, leaving the street trackage and entering the temporary terminal. They are virtually identical to the TR 0600 cars built for Tram. Port Tram is mostly single track. Note the packed snow below the motorman's position. The weather was awful, snow alternating with sleet. Here a tram approaches the Iwashima outer terminal, and now the terminal itself. Another example of the weather while photographing the line on the street. And the next morning, perfect sun, but the need to keep the schedule prevented the retaking of my previous photos. Here from Yuri Maller's website is a slide showing one of the 4 Little Dancer low-floor cars that Toyama acquired between 2010 and 2017 from a different car builder, Al-Nashayo. Note that the photo shows the connecting track between Port Tram and Tram running under the railway at the station. And the connecting track was built in 2020. And now service obviously runs through and right into the center loop. Takaoka, with a population of 170,000, lies only 12 miles away from Toyama. The single 8-mile-long 1,067 millimeter gauge streetcar line once ran all the way to Toyama as an extension of Toyama's Line 2, which now terminates at Daigakume. It now runs only as far as a ferry, where there had been an interurban bridge that was destroyed in 1980 when the lagoon's harbor was widened for water traffic, and that's the end of the line here. The Koshin no Kata terminal now in the middle of nowhere, but adjacent to the ferry slip. The system's rolling stock was built by Niigata and is virtually identical to Toyama's, but was constructed starting in 2004. Here an LRV crosses the Sho River. I like Takaoka's color much better. The line sports a combination of double and single track street running, depending upon how wide the street is. There are also a few 1967 built conventional 7000 series cars on the roster, all in advertising liveries. Do things go better with Coke? Well, streetcars do. The car house is about halfway up the line. Note the snowplow. And here is another 7000 series car. At this point, the double track turns into some single reserve track off to the right. And approaching the city center and the terminal on single track at the railroad station. And it seems that things go better with Coke in Fukui as well. It's a city of 270,000, some people 120 kilometers further down the JR tracks. This is an articulated car on the railway station spur. The 880 series cars, which were built in 1980, came from the city of Gifu when it abandoned its streetcar system on April 1st, 2005, just a few days before my first trip to Japan. My timing was horrendous. The Fukui system also has a 1,067 millimeter gauge and extends for a little less than 14 miles. This map shows the north-south line with its spur to the railroad station. The line is in blue, and here is the spur. My scan did not pick up the Etchison Railway, the interurban line that runs from the station and that operates jointly with trains. It runs around this way and connects with the trams at this point, which is 3 stops north of the station on the tram line at Tawaramachi. But only some of the trams continue along the interurban track, going for another 6 stations. The interurban line continues beyond this point, further north. This whole connection of the Echizen Railway with the tram line through here had not been made when I visited in 2010. It is odd that the track connection between the station spur from the main line runs from east to north, when the preponderance of the line and its traffic is to the south. Basically, the station is this way. The trams all have to turn that way, and if they're heading south, they then go back this way. Thus, cars using the spur to and from the south have to reverse ends at this point. The partly low-floor 800 series cars were built in 2000 by Nippon Sharyo. Both express and local service is operated, with each on a half-hour headway, so the main stops are served 4 times each hour. With only half of the trams using the spur to the railway station, it is served every 15 minutes as well. These trams come either from the north or south, go into the railway station spur, come back out to here, and then continue out that way. And then every other tram is a through tram. A 700 series car, also acquired from Gifu, on the fast private right-of-way line to the south. It was built in 1987. A 200 series articulated car from 1962, scrapped sometime after our visit, is shown running under one of quite a few sheds on the property. They are placed above special work and protect the interlockings from snowy weather, which is quite prevalent in this area. They seem to be at all switches on the private right-of-way. The 3-track Echizen Tafika terminal on the south end with a 600 and 2 much more modern looking cars. Finally, I don't know anything about number 610. It's handsome, but not very modern looking. I shouldn't say that's 610. Here's number 610. It was built by Nippon Sharyo in 1971, and this car has been scrapped since our visit. Finally, 4 new LRVs from Niigata were delivered to the property between 2013 and 2016. This photo is from Yuri Mahler's Transphoto site. So pardon me while I switch to the next carousel. Except I can't seem to get out of here. Excuse me, I'm hitting the escape button on my computer. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now for Kyoto, which we visited from our lodgings in Shinosaka near the Shinkansen station. There are 2 operations of interest in this city of religious and cultural heritage of 1.5 million population. One is a real streetcar line shown in green on this map. The Arishiyama or Randon, which we didn't visit in 2010, but I covered in February 2008. The standard gauge operation is 11 kilometers long, with about 2/3 of it on its 13-stop double-track main line, shown here, and 1/3 on its 8-stop single-track branch. The system is operated by the Keifuku Electric Railway and runs in the western portion of the city. It was always independent of the city's municipal streetcar system, which came to an end in 1978. Note that it connects to the metro. Metro is in pink on this map, And it also connects with the Hankyu Railway interurban system at Omiya, its eastern terminal. The Arashiyama terminal, covered to protect passengers from the elements, with one of the 14 600 series cars built from 1992 to 1995. Note the high platforms on this pay-as-you-leave operation, quite similar to Tokyo. This is a busy stop, which is also near an interurban line in an area that contains 3 religious shrines. Car 623 of the same series on double track in the street at the eastern end of the main line. A similar car on the single track branch, which itself is entirely on reserve track. Number 27, also shown on the branch, is one of Ramden's 2 replicas. They were built in 1994. Snow began to fall. It was February after all. Number 103 was built in 1929, but has since been rebuilt and renovated several times since. This is the inner terminal at Omiya, where the line connects with the underground portion of the Hankyu Railway interurban system that runs into Kyoto's city center from the nearby cities of Osaka and Kobe. I'm not quite sure whether the Japanese pronounce it Osaka or Osaka, but I'm used to saying Osaka. Once the snow began to fall, I rode back to Tenjingawa Station, where I hopped on the Tozai Metro line, one of 2 in Kyoto, to get over to the east side of town and the Keihan Electric interurban at Hama-Otsu Station. Both Kyoto subway lines have reciprocal running with interurban lines, but the Tozai-Keihan connection is the most interesting, as its subway cars run on the street in Atsu. I know this is not a tram line, but I think it's interesting enough to show part of it. The company's standard interurban cars also use street trackage, with both lines connecting at the Hama-Atsu station. That is not snow on your TV set. On this map, you can see where the metro splits into 2 branches, which is right here where my cursor is. Phil and I went out this way in 2010, and this was our route, continuing up from Hama-Atsu, which is here, and we actually rode up to here and circled back to Kyoto by a funicular, a bus, a cable car, another funicular, and finally 2 interurban railways. First, another snow shot from 2008. The Keihan is like most interurbans, with high-level platforms and station fare collection with turnstiles. I don't know when these 600 series cars were built. And here is a photo from the walkway leading to the turnstiles of the station, showing a train of newer 700 series cars. 10 pairs of these were manufactured from 1992 to 1993. And here is a similar view of one of the metro trains, showing it on the line to the storage yard and shop, which is located on the interurban line. It reminded me of the former operation of Buenos Aires subway line A, where trains ran on the street to reach the storage yard and shop. And by the way, the street running operation going off to the left in this direction is quite long. And now for some photos of the Hankai tram system in Osaka. Except for this late afternoon photo at the Tennoji terminal, one of 2 that connects the routes to different metro lines. The remainder of these slides are from my 2008 trip. Note how the terminal is in the center of the street and is connected to the rest of the world by an overpass. Also note that there are two terminals on the two-line, 19-kilometer long network that runs southwest under 600-volt DC overhead from Osaka's subway system. And the two lines are shown in green and blue. Osaka's municipal streetcar system was closed back in 1969, but like the one in Kyoto, this privately owned standard gauge operation has survived into the present. The line from Ibushu runs as a shuttle to the through line from Tennoji. The system has a fine collection of rolling stock, which consists mostly of double-ended Peter Witt style cars of different ages running on double track through city streets and on private rights of way. Number 168 was built in 1927 and is painted in the same color scheme as number 247, which operates in museum service over the high level bridge in Edmonton, Canada. Number 164 is quite similar to the 168. Note the back alley style right of way on the northern part of the line. Very similar to Tokyo's Arakawa line, except this one utilizes low level platforms. Further south, number 162 runs in Center Reservation. Number 711 was built in 1995 by Tokyo Car. It really should have a advertising wrap on it for the 7-Eleven series of convenience stores, which happens to be based in Japan. This is a photo of car 705 from 1990 crossing the Yamato River. Number 607, built in 1988, is shown coming off the Tennoji line at Taisha, where it joins the other line. Car 605 on street trackage just after it left the Tennoji terminal. The 501 was built in 1957 and is shown heading for the Hankai's Tennoji terminal. Note the operator's 10 years before COVID face mask. Number 503 back at the Tennoji terminal. And here at the same point, but from the internet, number 1002, one of 3 Little Dancer LRVs from Al Nashario, built starting in 2013. Except for its colors, the 1100s are similar to the 1000s and were introduced in 2020. A photo also from the internet. Now for Toyohashi, a city with a population of only 400,000, which I visited in 2008. The city is 200 kilometers east of Kyoto and can be reached in less than 1.5 hours by Shinkansen. The Toyohashi Railroad operates a single 5.6 kilometer, 1,067 millimeter gauge line with 14 stops running east from the railroad station. Number 3205 was built in 1955 and came from the tramway in Gifu when it was closed down in 2005. Here is car 3302 at the same location, heading toward the station in the background. Number 787, which also came from Gifu. This was built much later in 1987. And the view of sister car 786 from a downtown pedestrian overpass. And 3202 again from the same location. There are 2 branches at the far end of the system. Because the 2 are single track, the majority of cars running on the line are turned back at a siding at Kerinjomai, the end of dual track. And that's what's shown in this slide. The car house was quiet, but an elderly attendant who spoke no English had me sign a visitor's book, which had entries by rail fans from all over the world, and then signaled that I could go into the yard and take photos. Their so-called light rail vehicle, number 801, came from Gifu in 2005. Apparently, it was not a success and was somewhat hidden away. It's a partial low-floor car, but there were other units on the roster in the yard to photograph. Here's number 3502, which was built in 1956 and ran in Tokyo before being acquired by Toyohashi. And number 3102, a wartime car built in 1943 for Nagoya. Considering its location, it wasn't clear how often it gets out on the road, but in my opinion, it is much better than a replica. Now back to our 2010 trip and one of the major highlights of visit to Hiroshima. This view is taken just outside the railway station. Hiroshima, with a population of 1.3 million, is built on a number of islands in a delta where the Ota River runs into the inland sea. It contains Japan's largest streetcar system, the Hiroden, with 8 lines, one a long suburban route that is truly a modern light rail line. The standard gauge network covers 32 kilometers and is operated by a fleet of almost 300 trams of various models, including these modern light rail vehicles. As we all know, Hiroshima was ground zero for the first atomic bomb used in war form on August 6, 1945. This is the A-bomb dome, called the Industrial Promotion Dome, when it was still intact before the bomb. And is now the centerpiece of the Peace Memorial Park, a major tourist attraction. It stands without renovation or restoration near a museum that tries to explain the impact of the bomb on the unfortunate residents of the city. A not-to-scale map of the streetcar network. The railroad station is at the upper right. The line to the port is at the lower right, while the suburban line is at the lower left. And that's this. The Peace Park is near the center on the main street, the left end of the main street, right about here. A monorail called Tram is depicted by this dashed line. You can see there are multiple lines serving much of the inner city. Let's start with views of the urban portion of the system, which consists almost entirely of street running, but is separated from motor traffic. We'll look at the different models of trams on the roster. Car 702 is on Route 3. Number 704, built in 1982, is in the Hiroden's official livery. The 811, also a 4-axle unit in Peter Witt configuration, probably was built in 1983. Car 906 on the less frequent number 7 line. The 900 series was built in 1957 for Osaka and came to Hiroshima in 1969, right after Osaka's municipal streetcar system was abandoned. Number 911, it's highly likely that the brown color scheme was the one used in Osaka. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Car 1914 came from Kyoto, and the series still retains the color scheme used on that city's municipal lines. It was built in 1957. Now on to longer cars, mainly built for service on suburban Route 2. The 8 articulated units were called Greenliners when they arrived in 1987, probably because of the environmental movement being very strong in Hiroshima. The 3800s were followed by 8 3900s in 1990, also called Greenliners. Number 3951 is part of another follow-up order of 6 Greenliners. These 1997 built units were the last high floor articulated to be added to the roster. Number 5003 represents the first series of low floor articulated units. Christened Green Movers The 12 lines are Siemens Combinos built in 1999. Most of us know about the structural problems that the Combino cars had, and so this order was never repeated. After much planning and design, the 5100s came in 2005 from Kinki Sharyo and received the appellation Green Mover Max. Now, on to other photos of the suburban line, the 16-kilometer route long Route 2, which itself covers half the length of the entire streetcar system. Running to the southwest, it operates to Miyajimaguchi across the Onoseto Strait in Hiroshima Bay from the island of Itsukushima or Miyajima, which translates to Shrine Island. This is a beautiful mountainous retreat, virtually free of motor traffic, noted for the tame deer wandering its streets and paths, and the beautiful Itsukushima Gate, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The island is connected by ferry to the light rail line. The two was originally built as a typical high platform interurban by the local transit company with its own standalone terminal. But in 1962, it was integrated as a light rail line into the tramway network. Its inner terminal, shown here, Hiroden Nishi, still stands, obviously, and it's reconfigured with tracks running through it instead of stub ending. Here is Green Liner 3801 making its stop in the station, which is adjacent to the interurban's old car house and a short walk from a JR railroad station on its Sanyo line. The JR Sanyo line runs parallel to the light rail line and has its own station and ferry service to the island at Miyajimaguchi. The EMU trains make much fewer stops and therefore constitute a much faster way to travel to the island, but they don't have the distribution through the city center or the local ridership that the trams do. Combino Green Mover 5010 was photographed from a pedestrian overpass. A JR train on its 1067 millimeter Sanyo route. In a few places like this, the rights of way of the two lines run right alongside each other. Except for the different gauges, you'd think it was a 4-track railroad. The high-speed Shinkansen also runs parallel, as close as a mile or two in some spots. There are lots of inlets and rivers along the route, and therefore a great many bridges. The crossing of the Yawata River is most photogenic. Here is a JR train with Route 2's right-of-way in the foreground. Siemens Combino 5008 at the exact same spot. And here 5009 passes Green Mover Max 5101. And Green Liner 3956. Green Liner 3908 is shown at Kutatso Minami. Note the high-level platform from before the line's conversion to light rail. It's now no longer used. Combino 5011 at the exact same location. Here, Green Liner 3956 is shown on a part of the right-of-way that is typical of the interurban character of the route. And Green Mover Max 5101 at the exact same spot. And here's one of Combino 5009 that I really like. And number 3901, a Green Liner at an inlet. Back to downtown and a few more photos. The pedestrian overpass behind Green Mover Max 5101 is a quality location for railfan photography. Despite the separation from motor traffic, we found the operation in the urban area to be rather slow, especially when compared to the speeds on the suburban line. Here's number 814 from the overpass. and car 1915. The 912 and 904 are shown at the end of Route 7 and 8 at the JR Yokogawa station. Number 707 operating on the route to the port. Note the grassed right-of-way and the highway that brings truck to the harbor. And here's a last look at one of the ex-Kyoto cars under the big expressway. According to the Transphoto website, the Hiroden has added 6 new LRVs to its roster. The 5200 series is called the Green Mover Apex and was introduced to Route 2 in March 2019. This photo is from japanstation.com. The 1000 series began arriving in 2013 and 18 cars were built into 2019. These cars are called Green Mover Lex. The Tram monorail is a new transit line built in 1994, running northward from downtown for 18 kilometers. The manually operated line has 22 stations with an underground section at the city center end. I don't know why it's called a monorail, as it looks like there's a concrete guideway for rubber tires on both sides of the track. And now here we'll switch to another reel. Now we move on to the other city destroyed by an atomic bomb in World War II, Nagasaki. It's located on Kyushu Island, and in order to reach it, 400 kilometers southwest of Hiroshima, our Shinkansen train crossed the Kamon Strait through an 18-kilometer tunnel to Hakata, where we had to change to the 1067 millimeter network. Now you no longer have to change trains, as since September, a new Shinkansen extension opened. The little over 3-hour trip we experienced now takes 1.5 hours. If I had designed this sculpture, I would have had the benches facing the streetcar track. Nagasaki, a major port on the East China Sea, has a compact standard gauge streetcar system of 4 routes, with one operating on private right-of-way to the northern suburb at Akasako, and that's this line that runs up through here. With a population of about 450,000, it's about a third the size of Hiroshima, and its 11.5 kilometers of route is rightfully also a third of Hiroshima's. The major part of the city is down in this part. Car 1701 is shown at the station that serves the city's Peace Park, which commemorates the results of the plutonium bomb dropped on August 9, 1945, 3 days after Hiroshima's uranium bomb. Let's start with a review of Nagasaki's rolling stock. Like most other streetcar systems, Nagasaki did not make wholesale purchases of equipment, but bought replacements to worn out cars when needed. So there was a wide variety of models. Working from the oldest cars in service, we can chart the evolution of the company's rolling stock. All cars are double-ended. Number 209 represents a series of 16 cars built by Nippon Sharyo and Hitachi in 1950. The body design evokes US practice from 25 to 30 years earlier. Like all the cars we're going to see, they are peppy and they have plenty of verve. Another view of the 209, which you can see has front and rear doors. Fare collection is pay as you leave. Number 307 from 1953, looking much the same. Number 377 in advertising paint was built by Nippon Sharyo in 1962. It represents the introduction of the Peter Witt design with front and center doors. Number 502 came from a car builder called Naniwa Koki in 1966, but except for the center doors, the body looks similar to the 200s built in 1950. I'm going to have to take a drink of water, so bear with me for a moment. The 502 came from a car builder called Nawiwa Koki in 1966, but except for the center doors, the body looks similar to the 200s built in 1950. Number 506 is shown with number 1303. This slide transitions us to the introduction of a more modern design of streetcar for Nagasaki. Number 1301 of the same series of 5 cars was built locally by Nagasaki Urakami in 1975. They are described as Kauki style units, which seems to be descriptive of having new style bodies, a term that was also used for Japanese built automobiles. And I think it translates to radiant, bright, and splendor. To me, it represents the introduction of boxy bodies, which I personally never have considered attractive, like the Kawasaki cars in Philadelphia. Note the center poles in this view. Number 1502, also in the Kauki style, and also from Nagasaki Urakami in the late 1970s. Urakami is a neighborhood in the northern section of Nagasaki and is the name of a car house. Possibly these cars and others were built by the company. I just don't know. And here is the tan end of car 1502. Number 1701 from Nagasaki Urakami in 1999. Number 1802 in the same style and from the same source, but in the year 2000, implying that the style remained in favor for at least 25 years. Number 1801 in a bright color scheme, leaving the railroad station. Number 2001 in the same location, but approaching the station, was built by Alna as part of a project to create a Japanese standard LRV. It must have been just as successful as the Boeing project in the United States, as the car and its partner, number 2002, are no longer in service. Number 3002, one of 3 3000 series modern low-floor articulated light rail vehicles, was built by Alna Sharyo, formerly Alna Kauki, for Nagasaki in 2004. This was my first exposure to Alna's line of Little Dancer LRVs, a competitor of Nigata's in supplying smaller streetcar systems with modern rolling stock. I see many more Little Dancers in other cities on Kyushu and Shinkoku Islands later in the trip. Here the car approaches the railroad station. Apparently the name reflects the dancing image of the cars and the fact that they are little, at least both in the mind of the car builder. Another view of 3002. Interestingly, the timetables posted at car stops indicate which trips are accessible, being served by these low floor cars, a practice on many legacy systems worldwide when they introduced low floor cars. Just after our visit, Nagasaki received 2 more low floor Little Dancers from Alna, numbers 5001 and 5002 in 2011 and 2012. This view is from the transphoto.ru site. We complete our review of Nagasaki's rolling stock with a picture of car 168, a 1911 Kawasaki deck roof unit at the company shop. Phil and I visited the facility, and the folks kindly led us into the yard to photograph the car, which was at the front of one of the barn tracks. The wooden-bodied unit with brill trucks actually was built for Fukuoka and obtained by Nagasaki in 1957. Much better than a replica, it was restored for Nagasaki's anniversary in 1985. I really love the city of Nagasaki and its streetcar system, especially as we had some of the best food and lodgings that we encountered on the entire journey. Thus, bear with me as I show a few more slides of this nifty operation. Number 202 is shown parallel below the JR mainline tracks, crossing the Origami River at the beginning of a long stretch of reserve track alongside the JR, used by Route 3, running north to Akasako. This view is from the Ohashi stop, just below the car house. The 366 heading into a tunnel that runs under a shopping center at the Genbaku Shiriokan stop. Number 1303 in the Sakuramachi district, where the main street containing the tracks of Route 3 tunnels under a large park and the grounds of Nagasaki's City Hall. Number 303, about to pass 204 in a scene that evokes the glory days of street railways and vibrant downtowns here in the US. Note the mountains in the background at this junction of routes 3, 4, and 5. Little dance of 3001 just past the bridge over one of Nagasaki's many canals. Number 213 on the single track southern portion of Route 5 along another canal. Because of a single track, headways on the 5 are longer than those on the other three lines. Number 1205 is on a pedestrian street. The parked cars must belong to the residents or business owners, as the only through traffic permitted here consists of trams. Note that the center posts contain attractive street lighting fixtures. We don't see many dual purchase poles here in the US. The first of a few photos near the railroad station shows 1502 running northward from the busy stop, which contains a pedestrian overpass very much appreciated by traction photographers. This view of number 204 shows the stop's overpass leading to the street and the railroad station. Not very pleasant for passengers, especially those with luggage who have to climb up and down the stairs. And we finish Nagasaki with Little Dancer 3002 at the stop at the railroad station among plantings typical of Japanese stations. Our next two destinations were the cities of Kagoshima and Kumamoto on the island of Kyushu, each sporting 2 streetcar lines. We chose to stay for 2 nights in Kumamoto and make a day trip to Kagoshima rather than to keep changing hotels. The next morning, we rode to Kagoshima and detrained at the Chuo station, one of 2 major railroad facilities in this municipality of 600,000. The very attractive city greeted us here with its iconic Ferris wheel and some attractive statuary. Excuse me. This 1982 monument depicts the 19 young students from the area that defied Japan's overseas travel ban to study in England in 1865 in order to bring back new ideas to what was then an isolated nation. The station's forecourt was ablaze with blooming flowers, and on our half-day survey of Kagoshima's 13-kilometer standard gauge 2-route system, we noticed flowers everywhere, with both azaleas and cherry blossoms in bloom. Here, replica car 101 is shown among the flowers with the monument in the background. A photo of the system map posted at tram stops, but it's actually upside down with north at the bottom. Here's a better one from the company's website. The city's business district and most of its tourist attractions are on the section served by both routes, which is here. The Chuo Railroad Station, which is down here, is on Route 2, while the line to the south, covered later, which is here at the bottom, is a little bit like an interurban, operating on private right-of-way through an industrialized area through a valley. Here among the flowers is car 9513. The line carrying both routes through downtown is lovely, with grass track and center poles. Here, low-floor car 7501 approaches the camera with the Ferris wheel in the background. This represents Kagoshima's newest acquisitions, one of 4 X-model little dancer units delivered by Alna Shario between 2017 and 2019, which I have not yet seen in the flesh. This photo is from Yuri Mahler's Transphoto website. Working our way backwards chronologically, let's take a look at the rest of Kagoshima's roster. Here's a view of number 7002, one of a series of 4 predecessors to the 7500s, a type A little dancer from 2007. Note the elevated pods that contain the operator's position and controls in this otherwise 100% low floor car. Number 1017 is an earlier type A little dancer, which is among 9 that came between 2001 and 2005. Note how the center poles along the beautifully manicured section of center of the road reservation in the heart of downtown also contain street lighting fixtures, like in Nagasaki. Most of the system operates on reserved track, albeit a good deal is paved, separated from motor traffic by white lines or low curbs. High floor number 9702 is also an Alna product and is shown on the flowering Principal Street in Kagoshima's downtown. This 4-axle car came in 1998. Number 9512 has a similar look, but it's a 1995 renovation of a unit that started life around 1933 on Osaka's tramway, but was remodeled there in 1956 and arrived here in Kagoshima with about 14 others in 1969. Number 2141, also with a Peters with style door arrangement, was built by Kyushu Ryakaku in 1994. Even older is number 612, built by Nanina Kauki in 1960, during the era that the car builder was also supplying Nagasaki. Number 504 dates back to 1956 and was built by Toya Kauki. The 3-track car terminal at Kagoshima Ekimai at the northern end of the city center, serving both lines 1 and 2. Here are some additional views from that area. Number 7001 and 1016 are shown in this photo. Just Little Dancer 7001. Number 1018, among flowers and some modern art. Number 504 in the same area. And this is the northern junction of routes 1 and 2 at Takamibaba, featuring car 1012. Route 2 ends at Kuramoto, the southern junction of the 2 lines, where a pedestrian overpass was installed, no doubt for the benefit of railfan photographers. Car 9502 is shown, as well as the trackage in the foreground, which takes Route 1 south to its terminal at Tamayama. A view from the overpass showing just a single trailing point switch to serve the needs of Route 2. As a result, it's very congested here, and we saw more than one Route 2 car take this particular switch 3 times to get out of the way of Route 1 cars in both directions before its scheduled departure. This is where video would be most interesting. From the surface, cars 2121 and 2122 passed. Number 9702 operating near the northern end of the private right-of-way through the industrial area that lies in the southern part of the city. Number 2132 further along through the valley with a parallel JR line on the embankment above. Number 1015 waiting for departure time at the covered Taniyama terminal next to a suburban station on the JR line. Next on the list was a day in Kumamoto, where we spent the previous 2 nights. When traveling from Next on the list was a day in Kumamoto, where we spent the previous 2 nights. When traveling from Nagasaki, we inadvertently got off at the Kami Kumamoto station instead of the main one, following most of the passengers. And so to get to our hotel, we had to ride a Route 3 car instead of a 2. Here's a photo of car 1204 after leaving the streetcar terminal. It's a Toyo Kauki traditional unit built in 1958. Note the JR tracks behind the car. Kumamoto has a population of 670,000, just about the same as Kagoshima's, and also sports a 13-kilometer long 2-line standard gauge streetcar system. The lines in Kumamoto overlap for most of the length, as you can see on this map, splitting at the system's western end, with Route 2 operating south to the main station and 3 hitting the JR a little over 3 kilometers further northward. And this is where we got off inadvertently. This map from Robert Schwandel's urbanrail.net website shows the lines as A and B, while my photos will show them as 2 and 3. Yes, since my visit in 2010, the 2 became the A and the 3 is now the B. Note the green lines showing an interurban line, the Kumamoto Electric Railway, which has a branch that runs through the center. We ended up riding the interurban, but since it is not a tramway and we have time constraints, this is the only photo I'll show. Its terminal was across the street from the tram terminal. This photo of car 1091 is typical of the city's streetcar operation, which is mostly in pavement in the center of streets, separated from the motor traffic by white lines. As you will see, the rolling stock is quite similar to Kagoshima's, with both cities having a great deal in common, including the previously mentioned population, number of streetcar lines, route length, and even scrape-off day passes. In fact, it was virtually identical with respect to the age of the trams and their manufacturer until the advent of low-floor cars. The traditional looking Toyo Kauki built 1092, shown in a pleasant advertising color, dates from the mid-1950s. They have conventional controllers and brake handles and also contain wooden floors. Now to a more modern era. The 8200 series was built by Nippon Sharyo in 1982. The second photo of the 2-car series downtown was taken from a pedestrian overpass. The 8500 series arrived from Alna in 1985. And the 9200s from the same car builder 7 years later in 1992. The 9700s are Kumamoto's first low-floor articulated cars. In fact, the first 100% low-floor units to have been built for any Japanese property. They were modeled on the groundbreaking MAN ATTRANS German design that was first introduced in Augsburg, Munich, and Bremen. The 5 cars of this series were built by Nagata under an ATTRANS, later Bombardier, and now Alstom license. This is a departure from the correspondence with Kagoshima, as their low-floor cars are from Alna. The 0800 series of low-floor cars, which look like the LRVs running in many US cities, were also built by Nagata using Bombardier technology. They're very similar to what we saw earlier on our trip in Toyama and Takaoka. The deck roof 101 is Kumamoto's entry into the nostalgia craze, built by Alna with modern controls in 1993. One of the most alluring places to photograph the tramway is from the Tor Shasuji Suidocho stop in view of Kumamoto Castle. The landmark was reconstructed into its present form in 1960, but dates back from the period from 1467 to 1610. Cars 1355 and 9703 are shown in this view. Here are a few more slides from this vantage point. First, a close-up of 1355, built by Toyo Kauki in 1960. And now one showing the 2 classes of Nagata-built low-floor cars, number 9704 and 0802. The alighting passengers seem to be patiently waiting for both the tram and auto traffic to pass before crossing the street. A short stretch of Route 3 operates over back alley right-of-way, where the line moves from one street to another. Very reminiscent to me of the old North Shore Line trackage in Milwaukee between 5th and 6th Streets. Here is modern car 801, followed by a replica 101. We eventually rode Route 2 to the main railway station and photographed number 805, 8503, and 9705 at the stub end terminal. Actually, there was a great deal of construction going on in preparation for the inauguration of Shinkansen service to Kumamoto. The streetcar was being extended for 2 more stops, and a new through facility at the railroad station was being built, and both are now in service. This photo from the internet shows both the old trackage here on the left and the new trackage that runs right through the state, through the walkway to the station. Okay, now we have to go to the last reel. We returned to the northern part of the island and stayed in Kokura, part of Kitakyushu Prefecture, which has a population of 1.5 million, making it the 2nd largest city after Nagasaki on Kyushu. It was originally going to be the target of the plutonium bomb, but because of smoke and clouds were above the city on August 9th, 1945, the delivery aircraft was diverted to Nagasaki. We were only going to spend half of the next day here, as the tram line, actually a light rail style interurban, is relatively short, and we had to go to Okayama, which would become our headquarters for the rest of the trip. Kokura itself has a monorail line, and the area around its inner terminal at the JR station was easy to photograph. The line is 9 kilometers long with 13 stations and entered service in 1985. We did not have a chance to ride it. The remaining electric traction operation, called the Shukuo line, operates north to south in the western suburbs. Its streetcar connection to town was abandoned to buses in 1992. the last of a large network of standard and narrow gauge lines that serve Fukuoka and Kitakyushu. This is sort of the opposite of the experience in the US, where interurbans that ran over city streetcar networks were usually abandoned before the urban routes. While there is a bus over its former route to the new interterminal at Kurosaki, it is much faster to ride a JR suburban train from Kokura, as it takes only 20 minutes. Here is an older 3-section 2000 series articulated car on the electric railway. The standard gauge line is 16 kilometers long and has 21 stops and runs from Kurosaki to Nogata. Unlike most Japanese interurbans, it was never upgraded with high-level platforms and station fare collection, and so is now considered a light rail line. Here's another view of the 2000 series built in the early 1960s on this rural line. And here is a photo of number 2006 behind the Chikuho's car house and stop in Nakama at about the midsection of the route. Note the name of its current owner. The newer cars in the 3000 series are shorter and they're only double units and date from the late 1980s. Two-man crews are utilized with tickets purchased from on-one machines, exact change only, and checked by roving conductors. Zone checks indicating where passengers board are issued by machines located on station platforms. So you can't get on one of these trains without a zone check. Base headways are every 12 minutes, but in rush hours, this is augmented to a frequency of every 6 minutes on the inner half of the line as far as Nakama, which is more suburban than rural. The trains operate at decent speeds, connecting the underground terminal in Kurosaki and the elevated platforms at Nogata in 33 minutes, despite stopping at 20 way stations in between. We enjoyed riding and photographing the Chikuho very much. It's quite a nice operation with lots of curves, grade crossings, hills, and bridges. And there is a long trestle over the Anga River near the outer terminal. We did not have the time to walk back to the bridge for photos, as we had only allocated a half day to cover the line. 4 more articulated cars have been added to its roster since our visit. A photo from the Transphoto website shows the first of these little dancer units manufactured by Al Nashario. After a quick train ride, we reached Okayama, a city with a population of 700,000. The afternoon was spent riding and photographing the 3-mile-long 1,067 millimeter gauge Rishika system, the smallest in all of Japan. The stub end streetcar terminal at the railroad station serves both of Okayama's routes and consists of a center platform serving a pair of tracks for picking up passengers just beyond a double crossover and a second platform back here for discharging passengers. The lines are not particularly interesting, with the tracks running in the center of streets, generally separated from motor traffic. Route 2, the shorter of the 2 lines, follows Route 1 along a relatively wide boulevard for a short distance before turning off. Service on this line is not very frequent, but cars on Route 1 were running at an adequate 10-minute headway. This map comes from Robert Schwandel's urbanrail.net site. There are pedestrian overpasses at the ends of both lines, which afford a good opportunity to get photos without autos in the way, or not, in this view of car 7901. Both lines are double track, but Route 2 has a single track stub end terminal. Almost all of the rolling stock is traditional, built between 1980 and 1993, although there are now a few newer low floor articulators. The bodies are equipped with prominent and colorful advertising. Like the cars of most other Japanese systems, they are double-sided and double-ended. But of all the cities in Japan we visited, only in Okayama did we notice the use of right side doors and center platforms. As a result, passengers pay their fares upon entering. There are no zones. The first two digits of the car's numbers indicate the year of their acquisition, but only if you add the number 1,911 to them. Thus, number 7101 was acquired from the city of Akita in 1982 and 7201 from Oita a year later. Both were actually built by Alna in 1959 and 1956, respectively. Number 7601 was purchased new in 1986 from Alna. Number 8301 came in 1993 from Nikko after being rebuilt by Alna. It was constructed in the 1950s by Utsunomiya Sharyo, a company that later changed its name to Subaru. Oddly enough, that city, Utsunomiya, about 120 kilometers north of Tokyo, is in the process of building a new 1,067 millimeter gauge light rail line, which is supposed to open next year. And interestingly, the 9-mile-long undertaking will serve a Honda, not a Subaru, research and development facility. A telephoto view of number 8301 with 7202 at the outer terminal of Route 1, Higashiyama. Note the stairway leading up to a park in the background. The appearance of LRV 9201 at Higashiyama was a great surprise, as prior to the afternoon school rush period, I didn't know that Okayama had any modern cars. Built in 2002 and nicknamed Momo, after the hero of a Japanese fairy tale, this 6-axle unit was the first of Nagata's 100% low-floor articulators. Momo and car 7401 wait for time on the tail tracks just beyond the outer terminal of Route 1. A close-up view of the 9201 showing the trackage turning to the right and leading to the Okaden Museum, a combination art and railway tramway institution directed toward children. What cannot be seen here, hidden by the 9201, is a track running to the left, which is used by pull-ins and pull-outs for access to the company's shops. Momo at the inner terminal across the street from the JR station. I found the interior of the unit quite interesting, as it is equipped with a wood inlay floor ramping up to the center of the car from the doors and operator's position. Its 2-and-2 transverse seating is more like 1.5 and 1.5, and there are some wooden longitudinal ledges near the articulations for riders to rest their butts. Passengers wanting to sit down must step onto a pedestal to reach the seats, as wheel wells and other equipment are located directly above the floor. The pair of fare boxes in the double-ended car are mounted quite high, and the contact point for those wanting to tap smart cars is at the top. This means that many school children, which constitute a great deal of the ridership after 1500, have to stand on their tippy toes to pay their fares. To avoid being dropped or lost, their smart cars are generally attached to their book bags or backpacks by spiral telephone cords. And with the seats rather high above the car's center aisle, many of the well-behaved students' feet do not touch the floor when they're seated. It was a rather strange sight to see all those dangling legs. To me, this is the opposite of ergonomic design. But on the plus side, for the small kids, the transverse seats work out to be 2-and-2. A year after my visits, Okayama received a second low-floor articulated car from Nagata, number 1011, called Momo 2. This photo is from the transphoto.ru site. Okayama would be our home for the next and last 3 nights in Japan, as it is the railhead for travel to the island of Shikoku, home of 2 cities with streetcar operations, and day trips from this point would eliminate the need for moving our luggage and finding hotels in those places. It dawned cloudy, and Claire decided to stay in Okayama for sightseeing while I traveled to Kochi, home of Japan's second largest streetcar system after Hiroshima's. This was the view from our hotel room in Okayama during the previous afternoon when the sun was shining. The cloudy sky turned to substantial rain as I arrived in Kochi. I left the railroad station and easily found the streetcar terminal. Fortunately, it is protected from the elements, but I knew I would have to get wet when doing some photography, not realizing how wet. Cars 604 and 1002 contrast the old and somewhat new from Kochi's roster. Number 210, a Hitachi product from 1952, approaches the terminal. The Pacific Ocean port of Kochi is located north of Tosa Bay, and its downtown is defined by several rivers that flow into the harbor. Tosa is the historic name for the area, and their 1,067 rail system is operated by the privately owned Tosa Electric Railway, known as the Tosaden. 2 unnumbered routes operate in the city of 350,000 and cross at almost a grand union in the heart of downtown. The shorter one, about 3 kilometers in length, runs south from the station on double track in the center of an arterial street to an area sporting a high school and a chemical plant. The other line is very long, running east-west for a distance of almost 22.5 kilometers, very long for Japan. Its entire reach is not shown on this map. There is some service between the railroad station and the east-west line, like this, but predominantly the cars cross at Harimayabashi. I limited my photography at first in the hope that the weather would improve, but hour by hour it got worse, with the rain becoming heavier and heavier. It was extremely fortunate that almost all of the car stops are equipped with shelters. Another view at the almost Grand Union, showing a rare move from the railway station line to run westward. I rode car 609 over the long line to Ino, which changes from double track to single as the territory gets more rural. Because of this, the frequent headways get reduced as several short-term terminals and trams traveling the entire distance are relatively scarce. The operator of the car knew what I wanted to do and let me get off and photograph the car while we waited for opposite numbers at several passing points. This is the beginning of the single track portion at Kamagawabashi. What is a 4 or 5 minute headway in the city center doubles here, and after the line crosses the Kagami River, the track soon moves to private right-of-way at the side of the road, with occasional forays onto the street. After a few more passing sightings, we reach the village of Asakura, where every second car is short-turned again. There are no signals along the roadside reservation beyond this point, so in order to assure blocks are clear, operators exchange batons here and then again at the remaining passing siding at Yashiro Dori in the middle of nowhere. The batons, actually hoops, for each of the 2 sections of single track are painted yellow and red respectively, and the headway is every 21 minutes along the final stretch. This is a quaint operation, almost a rural tramway attached to a city system, and it certainly begs for further exploration and photography on a nicer day. This is the end of the line at Ino. It was nasty and wet. Note that the 600 series from 1957 and built by the Tosaden has a Peter with style door arrangement. Back at Harima Yabashi, now we'll take a look at Kochi's roster, starting with the 200 series cars built by Hitachi in 1952, which just have front and rear doors. A view of number 202. A lady was holding an umbrella over my head as I took this photo. Cars 1001 and 1002 were rebuilt in the company shops with a more modern body than the older units, possibly in the 1990s. The trend continued on into the year 2002 with cars 2001 to 2003 rebuilt in a similar manner from the higher numbered 200 series units originally built in 1955. Note the uncovered pedestrian overpass in the background. Had it not been pouring, I would have been able to take some photo of cars from these structures in view of the almost Grand Union, but that would have been foolhardy on this day. And here we see an outlier, low floor car 101, a little dancer built by Alna in 2002. I think it's accurate to say that except for this car, which is called the Heart Tram, all of Kochi's rolling stock is traditional, a good reason to visit the property. And another good reason, which unfortunately was not manifested because of the pouring rain, is to see the operation of equipment in Tosaden's fleet of international cars, which were all re-gauged in the company's shops. This includes a Goldfish from Oslo and cars from Lisbon and Graz as well. Other cars that have operated in Kochi include ones from Vienna, Milan, Prague, and Stuttgart. Since 2014, Stuttgart GT4 735 runs in tourist and charter service in Fukui. This 2017 photo from Andre Knur is from the Tram's photo site. There is also a replica of a deck roof car from 1905 in Kochi, which was built in 1984. This photo is from the Tosaden. Now we'll follow the eastern part of the main trunk line to Gomamachi, trying to stay out of the rain, but not always succeeding. Here is number 629 from the shelter of a shelter. Number 605 coming off the Kokubo River Bridge en route to Gomamachi. Further east along the line, Little Dancer 101 is shown heading toward downtown. Two more modern cars were delivered since my visit. Little Dancer 3001 from Alna in 2018 and 3002 recently. Car 607 in an advertising livery at the Gomamachi terminal, the only example of single track on the eastern end of the line. Actually, a very long tail track. The weather made it impossible for me to photograph other interesting parts of the operation, particularly on this line, where for the most part, the double track runs at what best could be described as the shoulder of a main road. Because of the narrow right-of-way, outbound trams operate very close to inbound automobile traffic, and at some stops, passengers literally are dropped off onto the highway. Because of similar tight clearances on the in-village street portions of the single track at the Eno end of the route, automobiles often have to pull over to the wrong side of the road to yield to oncoming streetcars. This concludes Kochi. On the next day, in Japan, Claire and I traveled across the same bridge and over the same rail route to Matsuyama, but this time under wire and in sunny weather, totally opposite from the previous day in Kochi. Matsuyama is the largest city on Shikoku with a population of 500,000. The map from Robert Schwandel's site indicates that Matsuyama has a rather compact tram system. 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, cover just under 4 kilometers of route. Much of its trackage is in streets separated from motor traffic by lane markings. There is some single track shown with thinner lines, and you can see that through here and down this way. Mostly on a stretch of very interesting back alley private right-of-way, which is quite narrow in places. The only reserved track on the system, except our terminals, and this is what is the narrow back alley routes. Service was intensive on routes 3 and 5, with headways running about every 4 to 6 minutes. Routes 1 and 2 are the circular loops with a stub terminal shared with the 3. Except for the parts that overlap other routes, the 1 and 2 run on single track along the private right-of-way. The 2 strategically placed passing sidings permit a 10-minute headway on both surfaces. Route 6 operates over the system's remaining single track, which is located in pavement with no passing sidings. As that section is quite lengthy, the frequency of Route 6 is no better than every 30 minutes. As you will see, I saved the best for last, like icing on a cake, both in preparing our trip's itinerary and showing it tonight. Our first view of the streetcar system, which is called the Shinai-sen by the locals, was right outside the railroad station. Route 5 turns back here, while the 1 and 2 run through. The 200 series consists of 5 cars that came from Kyoto in 1979, which had been constructed in 1965. Not much different are the traditional cars that sport 2-digit numbers. They were built for Matsuyama in the years from 1951 to 1965 and also have lasted a long time. Here are 2 passing at the stop serving the railroad station. Also at the same place, here is car 2106, part of a series of 4-axle versions of the Little Dancers, built by Alna from 2002 to 2007. These 10 were the first 100% low-floor cars ever built in Japan. We waited at the stop, however, for a good reason. And here is the system's pièce de résistance, the bachan. A timetable posted at the stop told us when it was coming. It's a train made up of a replica steam locomotive pulling 1 or 2 old-fashioned coaches. These locomotives are powered by diesel fuel, although the ersatz steam is occasionally emitted from the stack. A closer view. Interestingly, although it's hard to see on most photos, the coaches are equipped with a ladder-style pantograph, just like those on the streetcars. I observed one being lifted to the wire prior to the track switches at a junction to allow the desired route to be selected. This photo, however, comes from Wikipedia. Here is a little dancer in the city center. And one with bachan number 14 pulling just a single car. I saw 2 different heritage trams running that morning. Let me take another step. Okay. One of the terminals for the bachan, along with routes 3, 5, and 6, is the 1911 built Dago Onsen station. The streetcars can easily reverse here using a crossover, but it's more complicated for the steam train. It moves off to a yard area where the locomotive is first detached from the coaches. Then it is raised on a hydraulic-like turntable embedded between the rails and rotated manually. Back on the rails, it moves forward. After picking up its coaches again, it heads over to a layup area behind the station where the public can examine it and take photos. A bilingual plaque, only the English is shown here, provides a general history of this iconic operation. As far as I could tell, it got the name Bachan from a very popular 1906 novel, where the central character rides these trains into Matsuyama each day to go to work as a teacher. The railway lines were originally 762 millimeter gauge, and the locomotives were imported from Krauss in Munich in 1891. The gauge of the system's routes was widened to 1067 millimeters between 1931 and 1937, and electrification came line by line from 1931 to 1967, with steam operation finally discontinued in 1958. In 2001, the diesel-powered replicas made their appearance for historic and touristic purposes. One of the original trains is preserved. Here is a close-up of the replica's builder's plate. Then when departure time approaches, the train is wide around to the station. It's fun to see the two side by side. The tram is air conditioned, as all streetcars in Matsuyama are, but one cannot say that about the old-fashioned coaches. The Bochan's other terminal is usually Matsuyama Machi, the southern end of routes 1, 2, and 3, and near the principal interurban station. This track map from the urbanrail.net site shows the Uyutetsu interurban lines, which are under the same management as the streetcar system. And this is one of the interurban lines. You can see both operations share the same shop area, which is right here at the left at Komachi. And they cross each other at grade at this point. You can see the single track crossing the interurban's double track. After a brief look at the interurban, we will follow the single track used by the number 1 and 2 lines. So this is the Komachi area. It's very congested, the shop area, and the line remains electrified at 600 volts DC, both the interurban and the tramway, although the other interurban routes operate at 750 volts. It was too difficult to photograph here without trespassing onto the interurban's right-of-way. But more interesting is the on-street crossing. Interurban service on the Takahama line operates at a 15-minute headway, so photographers don't have to wait too long for an EMU train to come. And with the crossing gate stopping traffic every 7.5 minutes, a meet is not at all unusual. Here's another view. And at the same crossing, the transit company's vintage tourist service bus drives by. Now here are my best views along the single track circular line, which is actually quite pretty, even though it traverses a great deal of narrow back alley right-of-way. Car 68 passes some roses as it approaches a station. Confining is hardly the word for most of the trackage. Separate platforms for clockwise and counterclockwise cars, necessary because of the Peter Witt style door arrangement, are squeezed in. 2 more views of cars on the narrow right-of-way. Crossing gates are used to prevent collisions and to avoid flagging. The newer low-floor cars are also assigned to routes 1 and 2. The 21 approaches one of the passing sidings, where it passes number 2003. 2 more photos with cherry blossoms, which were at their peak during our visit to Matsuyama. After covering the Bochan and the streetcars to my heart's content, there was still time to do a little sightseeing. This map shows the city's principal tourist attraction, the 17th century Matsuyama Castle at the summit of 430-foot high Mount Katsuyama in the geographical center of town. The trams are shown in shades of blue on this map, and the interurban appears in orange. Here is the shop area, and here is the crossing that I photographed earlier, showed earlier. The common way to access the apex is to ride the ropeway in one of its two counterbalanced gondolas, shown in the center, and that's right here on the map. However, the system does not have the capacity to carry the large crowds on a nice day. So there is also a triple chairlift that climbs to the summit alongside. Here's the cable and here's the chairlift. The ride on either mode costs about $5 each way, with the cable line being faster, but it also can have long queues with long waits for access. We sampled both. The gondola is at left and the chairs are on the right. This view from the top places the competing systems on the other side of each other, the gondola and the chairs. A three-quarter view of one of the two cable cars, and a second panoramic view from the summit of the city and surrounding mountains, illustrating the area's allure and beauty. For completeness, we conclude our visit to Matsuyama with two views of Route 6, the second along the single track. And lastly, a photo from Wikipedia of one of the 10 Little Dancer type S cars obtained from Alna by the Shinai-sen since my visit. The 4-axle cars are numbered 5001 to 5010, with the most recent arriving this past year. I've been told that this all red-orange color scheme is now being adopted for all the city's trams. After returning to Okayama and spending the night, we rode the Shinkansen back to Tokyo and continued on to Narita Airport. We almost didn't make it in time for the flight because of a suicide on the high-speed railway. But all's well that ends well, just as tonight's program.